This is Greg Bluestein with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and I'm here live from John Ossoff's campaign victory party at the Westin at the Concourse, right in the middle of Sandy Springs. And you can see the cash bars behind me. Reporters are already lining up to cover this event. We would be in that room, but it's too loud because they're playing all sorts of music and propaganda videos in there. But I'm just here to take some questions about the state of the race and to talk a little bit about where we are. The latest polls show this race at neck and neck. A WSB poll coming out Monday showed it at the margin of 0.1%, so it can hardly get any closer than that. If you talk to 6 different people about this race, they'll have 6 different opinions on how it would go, and I think that anyone who tells you they know what's going to happen tonight is dead wrong. But that doesn't stop folks from prognosticating, including us, and that's what we're going to do a little bit tonight. One of the biggest wild cards of the race right now, as we stand here, is the rain. There's flood warnings across most of Metro Atlanta. There's horrendous traffic. There's downpours on and off all day, as we all in the district know. And how that impacts turnout remains to be seen. Traditionally, of course, rainy weather and traffic-clogged streets don't really entice people to get out there, especially those who are kind of on the fence about voting. More than 140,000 people have already cast early ballots, and odds are, if it's anything like the first round of voting, that Ossoff will have a lead. He won't have as big of a lead as in the first round of voting back in April, but most analysts think he'll have some sort of lead, and that Karen Handel must have really good election day turnout to overcome that advantage. Now, whether or not this rain dampens both their turnouts equally, or whether or not it hits one party over the other, who knows? There has been $50 million plus spent on the race, so pretty much everyone in the district knows what's at stake. That includes $40 million plus in ads, most of them negative, that have bombarded us on the airwaves. So that's kind of where we stand. Most of the polls show 1%, 2%, 3% undecided, so very, very slim margins of undecided voters. The Trump factor is what everyone nationally is talking about. It's being cast as, an Ossoff victory would be cast as the first major setback, electoral setback, to Donald Trump and his White House. Both the candidates have kind of had a, sort of tiptoed around Trump of late. Now, John Ossoff got into campaign January promising that he'd be a make Trump furious candidate. He promised to be a voice that would stand up to Donald Trump. But of late, he's kind of taken a more centrist message. His campaign still sends out literature and mailers talking to liberal voters in the district. But let's say they only account for about 45% of the district. Even if he rings out every possible vote from the Democrats in the district, it still might not be enough. So he's had to appeal to moderates, to centrists, to independents who might otherwise vote for Republicans. So that's why he's kind of holding back on attacking Trump. When Donald Trump and Mike Pence came to the district to campaign, his campaign said basically nothing. It just said, I'm not concerned with out of Washington figures coming down to campaign for us, for my opponent. Handel kept Trump more at arm's length at the beginning of the campaign, but ever since she notched a spot in today's runoff, she has aggressively embraced him, campaigned with him, as we mentioned earlier, and also backed pretty much all of his major policy initiatives. She said she's on an all-hands-on-deck type of mentality, and that she will not be an extension of the White House.
And Greg, can you tell us where we are right now?
Yeah, you mean where I'm standing? Mm-hmm. I am at the Westin in Sandy Springs at the Concourse Athletic Club, at the Concourse facility, and I used to work next door at the Concourse Athletic Club. That's why I have that in my mind. In fact, it was a great high school job, by the way. And we're here. There's going to be, there's going to be maybe 1,000 plus supporters here. There's already 50 reporters in the room, and there's going to be, as I said, 1,000, maybe more supporters. If it's anything like his April 18th party, which was packed to the gills with folks, we're expecting a very long night. I'd be shocked if we're out if we have a result before midnight, especially if it's a close race, as close as these polls show. If it's within 1% margin, either candidate can ask for a recount, and if it's within a 0.5% margin, it's an automatic recount. So we could be in for it, or it could be, a pretty clear winner either way. You never know with these things going on, especially with special elections, which are so unpredictable.
And So you said people haven't showed up yet. So what are people expecting tonight? You know, more speeches, more rabble rousing. What are people looking at?
Yeah, so the polls close at 7. This is a little guide to what to expect tonight. The polls close at 7. We won't really have our first concrete results for another hour or two. Odds are the cab numbers will come in first, and those will be early voting totals, and they will show Ossoff with a pretty formidable lead. And at that point, a lot of people will go nuts and say, oh, Ossoff has this in the bag. Well, the cab is also by far the bluest part of the district. It's also the smallest part of the district. So resist the temptation to think that it's over when Ossoff has a pretty big lead with early voting numbers into Cobb County. At that point, Cobb County will start coming in probably. Cobb County is one of the staunchest Republican strongholds. Yes, it flipped from red to blue in the presidential election, but Karen Handel's been campaigning all over Marietta and thereabouts. She's expected to win Cobb County pretty handily, no pun intended. But Ossoff has a campaign office in Marietta. He's been trying to cut into her margins there because he thinks if he can keep it to single digits or such in that area, that he has a better chance of winning. And Fulton County is really the big question mark. In the last round of votes, Ossoff won Sandy Springs, and he kind of cut a swath up Georgia 400. He won a lot of those densely packed precincts along Georgia 400. And then his support kind of darted over to eastern Johns Creek, which is a fast, diversifying area that you wouldn't ever think would be supportive of Democrats, but it's turned much more blue, especially in this last vote. Handel's support, along with East Cobb, is really focused on Roswell, which is where she's lived for the decades, and her sort of launching pad for all of her political campaigns, and Milton, which is a extreme North Fulton city that is very, very deep red. So if she can have double-digit huge margins there, then her campaign is confident that they'll stay right in this race.
And I encourage all the viewers to ask questions. You can see Greg on CNN, Fox, and a lot of other programs, but it's rare that you can actually ask him a question in the comments, and he will attempt to answer it. So feel free and ask away in the comments. No question is too silly for our experienced political reporter. A question for myself, though. A lot of commenters have been saying that the early voting has kind of made the rain not as applicable here when it comes to voting. What does that actually have an effect on?
The majority of the district's voters have already cast ballots. That's what's interesting about this race. 140,000 plus people have already cast early vote tallies, which is almost the total. And we had 190,000 total votes in the first round. So let's say turnout is somewhere between 200 and 240,000. That still means the vast majority have already cast ballots. And that just remains to be seen who it helps. I mean, Republicans are much more confident about the early voting totals than they were in the first round. I asked Secretary Handel about that a couple days ago, and she said, basically, we've deprived Ossoff of the same advantage he had in April, which I think the numbers will show is true. He had 60+% of the vote in early voting back in April. It's probably going to be in the 50s at this point. Now, is that because they just did a better job Republicans did a better job at getting voters mobilized, or Ossoff did a worse job? Or is it just because more Republicans and more voters in general will be on vacation this week? I mean, the last vote was in April. Where a lot of people were still in the district, this vote in the middle of the summer, people were on vacation. So that could be a factor in it. The fact that counties opened multiple new early voting locations was a big deal, the Cobb County being one of them. They opened early voting locations in Brookhaven and Tucker, as well as Dunwoody, if I recall correctly. They had 4 total throughout the county. So they're trying to drive out turnout there. Fulton County opened several more. So that accounts for some of the spike in early voting. And in about a couple hours, we'll know how much it helped either candidate. If it's a close margin, if Handel only has a 4 or 5 point deficit in early voting, it could be a long night for John Ossoff.
And again, encouraging viewers to ask away in the comments. At what point tonight will you feel good about saying, okay, I think I know when we got it in the bag? What are you looking for tonight?
Yeah, so we'll be looking at those early voting totals for one, and that's not something we call the race on. We'll be looking at how well he does in DeKalb County and how well she does in those Republican bastions we mentioned earlier. Overall turnout is another big question. Mark Roundtree of Landmark Communications, which is a respected polling firm in Atlanta that does WSB's polls, kind of described it as a bell curve. This was before the rain, but a bell curve. If there's lower than expected turnout, it helps Ossoff because his supporters tend to be more enthusiastic. If it's higher than expected, it could help Ossoff because that means more younger people are voting, and polls show that he's doing very well with younger voters. But if it's somewhere in that middle range, and I don't even know what that middle range would be, but if it's somewhere in the middle there, he says that will help Handel because that means it's a more traditional turnout, and this district is traditionally Republican. There's just more Republican voters in the district than Democrats. And so that's one of the big questions we'll be looking at. Fortunately, I don't have to make that call because we rely on the Associated Press or one of the big major networks to make the call because they have teams of people pouring through the numbers while we're free to go report on what's actually happening. So,
and Greg, just for some perspective,
yeah.
Folks who are new to keeping an eye on politics every second of every day, could you just describe how remarkable and what you find most remarkable in this special election?
Yeah, I mean, this is a race that was not supposed to be competitive at all. When we first wrote the story about Tom Price getting tapped as Donald Trump's health secretary, I think the next day I wrote a story about here's the Republicans who could get in the race. And at the very bottom of the story, I had a line about there's a few Democratic names that might get in, but this is a traditionally Republican seat. This is a seat that Tom Price has won landslide victory after landslide victory to keep. This is a seat that was represented in some form or fashion by Johnny Isakson or Newt Gingrich. The lines have changed a little bit since then, but they both served in the 6th District. And this is a seat that Mitt Romney and John McCain easily won in doing their presidential campaigns, which makes it the fact that Donald Trump only won it by less than 2% of the vote, made it competitive, and really gave John Ossoff an opening to make this a real race.
And I'm going to ask one more question if no one else wants one. If you want to keep staring at Greg's face, you should ask a question. But
then we're definitely not getting another question.
What do we learn from an Ossoff win, and what do we learn from a Handel win?
So no matter what happens, this will be cast, as I said, as a referendum on Donald Trump. That's why there's already 50 or so reporters, national reporters, mostly national reporters in that room over there. What this actually means, it's a special election. The nation's eyes are on this race, but in 2018, there will be hundreds of these types of elections, and there won't be nearly as much attention or cash going into a race like this. So what it says about 2018, who knows? What it says about Donald Trump, it says that a Handel victory could buoy other conservative incumbents who are worried about allying with Trump, and an Ossoff victory could really, send shockwaves. Also, Democrats hope that an Ossoff victory gives them a path to compete in these conservative districts that are fast changing in suburbs like Atlanta. Democrats need to flip 24 House seats next year to retake the House, and I don't think they're looking as much at working class strongholds that they used to hold that now Republicans have a firm grip on. I think they're looking at seats like this. They're looking at seats in Orange County, California, or in suburban New York that are pretty establishment friendly, that are somewhat close, and that Republicans have held for a long time, but where there are voters who are somewhat skeptical of Donald Trump.
Okay, Greg, where can folks find the latest breaking information?
You can find it at ajc.com, or for even more details and stories, myajc.com/politics.
Okay, and this has been Greg Bluestein and Ben Brash for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks so much, and follow along.